specific lane of travel in the library that only allowed them to go one way, despite the fact that it would have been much shorter to go directly the opposite way. But they were so ingrained, they were so trained that that's the way that they're allowed to go during the normal operation of that library that no one even thought to try to go the other direction. So federal government model is run, hide, fight. Our model was escape, barricade, fight. So escape, a little bit more clearly defined, is get out of there. Get the hell out of there. Get away from the situation. Get as far away as fast as possible, whatever the nearest exit is. If there's not an exit, create an exit. And if you're not able to escape, that's when we get into barricade. And again, federal government model calls that hide. Hide is what they did in Columbine. They hid under desks and chairs. And hide is what I do when I play hide and go seek with my children. But the repercussions of being found are very different when you're playing hide and go seek versus dealing with an active shooter. Barricade, on the other hand, is very different. Barricade, we're talking about putting ourselves in a room, ideally that has a door that is able to be secured. We're either chalking that door by wedging something underneath of it. We're tying it off with a belt. We're tying it off with shoelaces, depending on whether it opens inwards or outwards. If it opens inwards, we might be stacking furniture behind it, trying to hard point that furniture to the opposite side of the room so that we're making a nice barricade that's going to slow down the shooter from being able to get in that room, which will do a couple things. One, it'll buy us some time. And two, it might make the shooter just pick another room that's a little bit of a softer target. Keep it moving, keep going, as opposed to standing there for 3 or 4 minutes or however long it takes them to defeat our barricade to get to what's going on inside that room. So barricade, and then finally fight. If and when the shooter breaks through your barricade, you're left with no other options. So at that point, we need to fight. And whether you're trained and you're skilled or not, whether you're armed or not, at that point you have no other alternative. So you want to be thinking about positioning whatever personnel you have inside that room in a way that makes sense, in a way that's going to be tactically efficient for dealing with someone coming through that door. So as soon as we get that barricade set up, we're starting to think about where can we utilize our resources, where can we position our personnel so that we can be ready to fight. If there's anything in the room that we can use as an improvised weapon, whether it be a pen that we can stick into a hammer fist and use it to cycle in an ice pick grip or reverse grip, a fire extinguisher as an impact weapon, chairs as an impact weapon, you name it, whatever the case may be. You know, when they teach kids, they'll say throw stuff and grab, pencils and pens and throw that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about things that are going to do a little bit more damage, things that are going to act as a force multiplier to give you the ability to do more damage than you could do with just your hands and feet and knees and elbows on your own. You want to position personnel accordingly. Obviously, you don't want to be standing directly behind the door. If the shooter does start to put rounds through the door, that's what we call the fatal funnel. We want to stay out of that door frame. Okay, so we want to be close to the door where we can get to the shooter as soon as they come in and have someone either go low and someone go high, someone go for the weapon, someone go for the body, someone go for the weapon, someone hit them with an impact weapon, things like that. So escape, barricade, fight. Okay, those are what we do once the shooting has happened and we're stuck in that scenario and we either can't get out. If we can't escape, we find a room that we can barricade in. And then if we have to, if the shooter breaks through our barricade, which again, barricade is a temporary thing, but if the shooter breaks through the barricade, we're prepared to fight. The other thing that you need to think about in an active shooter situation, and really the time to do this is ahead of the scenario. So you want to, we have a saying in the military, I'm not in the military, but when I work for the military, they have a saying of what we can't prevent, we plan for. So in other words, we cannot prevent active shooter scenarios from happening. We can't prevent a lot of bad things from happening, but we sure can plan for them. And we can have a plan of action ahead of time so that when that time comes, we already know what we're going to do. If you've ever read any of Clint Emerson's books, Clint Emerson wrote 100 Deadly Skills, 100 Deadly Skills Survival Edition, and a pretty good book called Escaping the Wolf. Clint's a former Navy SEAL. He was with SEAL Team 6 developmental group for a little bit. He was also with the NSA for a little bit, and he's got an incredible amount of experience going overseas and doing all kinds of secret scroll stuff. But he talks a lot in some of his presentations about having a plan ahead of time. When you're in the middle of a problem, specifically in this case an active shooter, that's not the time to be trying to formulate a plan. You need to have some type of a plan of action before you find yourself in that scenario. So a couple things you can do that are real simple. As you're moving about throughout your daily life, wherever you may be, you can think about whether or not that's a hard or soft target. Okay, soft target is something that is very vulnerable, low security, a lot of people, but relatively no security. So think about like a mall. You know, you've got a handful of security. They're generally unarmed. They're generally untrained, but you've got a lot of people. Okay, so that's an example of a soft target. Harder target would be like maybe a police station or something where there's armed personnel, trained, higher security, even some arenas where they pat down and they've got armed security on site. A little bit more difficult to penetrate. So think about just like a burglar selects a house. You know, they see the house that's got the alarm sign and a dog barking and a beware of dog and floodlights and security cameras. That's a hard target. They skip that one and they go on to the next one. They pick the soft target. So you can think about those things before you're heading out. Is where I'm going a hard target or a soft target? Is it greater or less likely that there's going to be a problem here? Specifically in this case, we're talking about an active shooter situation. The other thing you can think about is identifying cover versus concealment while you're out. So when we talk about cover, we're talking about something that will physically stop bullets. And cover is relevant to what you're being shot at with. So if I'm being shot at with a handgun, you know, one thing may be cover, where if I'm being shot at with a rifle, that same thing may in fact not be cover. Okay, so when you're out and about, if you can identify things that can be utilized as cover, cover is always going to be your go-to. So if I'm out at the mall and an active shooter situation happens, and I've pre-identified places of cover, that could be one of the first things I'm trying to get to as I'm looking to escape. Concealment is next best. You know, concealment, we're hidden, we're out of view, we're out of sight from the shooter, but it provides no ballistic protection. So in other words, I could hide behind a curtain and I might be concealed, but it's providing me no ballistic protection whatsoever. Okay, so pre-planning, thinking about identifying cover versus concealment, thinking about where you're headed, and is it a soft target, is it a hard target, is it somewhere you have to go? You know, New Year's Eve, big nights where people go out and they congregate in large areas that are generally unsecured. If you can avoid those places, it probably would make sense to avoid those places. If you have to go there and you're able to be legally armed and you're trained, then by all means that makes sense as well. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about as it pertains to active shooter is medical. If you're a guy who carries a gun everywhere and carries a knife everywhere, and you go out and you train in your self-defense, you do your jiu-jitsu and your Muay Thai and your Krav Maga, your boxing, whatever it is that you do, that's great, and that's several pieces of the pie when we're talking about self-protection, but you're missing a component, and one of the things that you're missing is the ability to have some medical knowledge. So if you're out and about and an active shooter situation happens, you want to make sure that you have some type of medical capabilities, and you want to have the knowledge and the skills to go with those capabilities. Specifically, a couple things you can carry that are real easy. I carry a tourniquet. This is a soft T wide. I've just kind of flat folded it so that it's real thin and streamlined, and I can throw it in a pocket and take it everywhere that I go. If I'm shot or I'm cut, bleeding in any extremity, arms or legs, this can be utilized to stop the bleeding and keep me alive until I'm able to get to additional medical help. Tourniquets are cheap, you know, $30, and they're very easy to use. It doesn't take a whole lot of training. You know, you're going to put it as high as you can, as tight as you can on the extremity, and you're going to go until there's no distal pulse, so you've shut down the blood flow. Something like this, which, you know, years ago these were a big no-no, and it was all a bunch of nonsense really because of some bad information. These have kept a lot of troops alive overseas. They've saved law enforcement personnel here stateside. There was an incident in Philly where a Philadelphia police officer used one to save his own life not too long ago. And again, it's a $30 piece of equipment. It takes you 5 minutes to learn how to utilize it, and it could save your life, or it could save the life of a family member. So I carry this in my pocket, on my body, everywhere that I go, and in my vehicle I have an additional medical kit, or 2 or 3, depending on what vehicle or where we're going, that has some additional stuff as well. More tourniquets and other stuff. The other thing you can throw in your pocket that's real simple is some quick clot combat gauze. Again, this is just a very slimline pack, that, you know, is even thinner than a wallet, and I throw this in my pocket, and it takes nothing. Okay, quick clot combat gauze is a hemostatic agent, so it aids in blood clotting. So again, if you're shot somewhere other than an extremity, or even some cases in an extremity, you can pack the wound with the quick clot combat gauze, and that will aid in clotting so that you don't bleed out. A couple little things. You know, again, not super expensive, not a big deal. Doesn't require a whole lot of training to be able to become proficient in their use, but they can make the difference between whether or not you survive that. If you're flying, if you're in an airport, like the situation that just happened recently, these are things that are not prohibited items. So you can carry these anywhere. I've flown with these, even areas that are quote unquote non-permissive environments. You know, you go to a ball game and they pat you down, and you can't have a firearm. No one's going to prevent you from bringing a tourniquet or some gauze in there. So just something to think about. Again, when you're out and about, you know, unfortunately, the world that we live in now, we have to be concerned with active shooters and active killers and things of that nature. So a little bit of forward thinking. Okay, remember, federal government model is run, hide, fight. Our model is escape, barricade, fight. Just different terminology. Escape is get out of there. Okay, throw a chair through a window, find an exit, make an exit, whatever you need to do to get as far away from the problem as you can, as quickly as you can. If that's not feasible for whatever reason, we want you to barricade. Get into a room where you can secure the door. If it opens inward, chalk it, stack stuff behind it, wedge it, hard point that stuff to the other side of the room so they can't force the door open. If it opens outwards, we're looking at tying it off with a belt or shoelaces or whatever the case